This is not a how-to video. I'm in no way qualified to teach you anything about welding. But if you're thinking about learning to weld and you wonder what it's like for someone with zero experience to get started welding, here's how it went for me. There are tons and tons of videos on YouTube that I found immensely helpful. If you already own the gear and you want to learn how to weld, you should go and see what the experienced welders have to tell you. If you're just trying to decide whether or not you want to go buy some gear and try to learn how to weld, then maybe this video will be helpful for you.
In this video, I'm going to tell you about the affordable basic welder I bought and explain why I chose it, show you the other stuff you may need to purchase to go along with it, talk about some key basic information I learned in my research, show you my first unskilled attempts at welding, and at the end of the video, I'll show you the small functional item I designed and built on my second ever day of welding.
In the description below, you'll find timestamp links to each segment, so you can jump to whatever detail is useful for you. So this is the titanium Flux 125 flux welder, and it's a Harbor Freight special.
The Titanium Flux 125 is a flux core welder that runs off standard 110 household current. It is simple to use and does not require gas. While it won't do everything that larger, more expensive units can do, it gets very positive reviews across the board as a perfectly suitable welder for most DIYers like me.
Now, I'm not going to talk extensively about this particular unit, in part because I don't really have any expertise, so you shouldn't listen to me, and in part because there are a gazillion videos about this on YouTube. So if you want to learn more about this unit, just search Titanium 125 on YouTube. You'll find a bunch of videos made by people who actually know what they're talking about, actual experienced welders. And that's actually one of the reasons I ended up deciding on this, because I watched a whole bunch of videos made by experienced welders who have been impressed by what this unit does for the price. Now, I do normally shy away from buying anything other than the most basic, sort of foolproof, small utilitarian things at Harbor Freight. In fact, it wouldn't initially have even occurred to me to go to Harbor Freight for a welder. I did some looking on Craigslist, and then I started looking at YouTube, trying to figure out what might be a good option for me as a beginner to just get my feet wet. And this is the thing that came up over and over and over again. If I can manage to pull off a couple of jobs that I would have otherwise had to pay someone to do, I think it pays for itself. And, I think it's going to be fun. My conclusion after watching a lot of people talk about this and use this is that this is a good place for me to start, in big part because it's very, very affordable. I'm not going to go out and spend $800, $1,000 on welding equipment. If I have to do that, I'm just not going to do it. I'll hire someone to do my welding. For now, I think this is a great starting point. So in addition to the welder, it does come with a spool of flux wire, an extra tip, a strap that can be attached, I guess a carry strap for the top, and a pretty nicely detailed manual. So I'll be giving that a read before I do anything else. Note that you do need to plug this into an outlet that's on a 20 amp circuit.
Getting the welder set up the first time is straightforward. You have to install the spool of wire and route it through the wire feed mechanism. You just have to take care not to let the wire loosen up on the spool as you do this.
Arm down.
So right inside the welder, there is a little chart that shows you the different thicknesses of steel and what the settings on the front should be. Getting the welder itself is just one piece of the puzzle. There are a few other things that you'll need. Some of this stuff I had already, but I needed to buy a few more items to be at least minimally set up for some very basic welding. Fortunately, none of this stuff was terribly expensive. Gloves obviously are essential, some kind of heavy leather glove. I did not buy welding gloves. I ran across a number of people who talked about the fact that for this kind of welding, a thinner leather work glove will work fine and it'll give you a little bit more dexterity with what you're doing. So I got these instead. These were not any less expensive than buying welding gloves. They were just, these were just a little easier to move around in. Across the alley, the neighbor's dog's up there on their deck, and he can see me through the trees. And when I'm in here in the garage and he's on the deck, he barks his fool head off at me. So that's what that lovely sound in the background is. The mask obviously is essential. You cannot look at this with your bare eyes. You can really seriously damage your eyesight. The helmet I'm using is an auto darkening mask that I got also at Harbor Freight. And it was like $45. These can get really expensive, but I read a bunch of reviews on this before I bought it. People seem pretty happy with it for the price. It's been working just fine for me. It goes dark as soon as I start to weld, and it goes light again when I stop welding. Do make sure you have some kind of safety glasses as well if you're using the grinder or a saw to cut the metal up. You often see me wearing my reading glasses when I'm working on stuff. These are shatter resistant plastic, they're not glass, and I can't really see without them. An angle grinder with a cutoff wheel on it for cutting metal. Otherwise you can also use something like a circular saw with a metal cutting blade. Some kind of wire brush for cleaning up the weld afterwards. You can just use a manual wire brush. I have one of those too, but what I notice a lot of people using is various forms of rotating wire brushes, so you get a lot of brush action very easily, and that's working great so far. Some kind of magnet like this that you can use to help hold your work pieces together to make sure they're at a perfect right angle. You'll definitely need some way to clamp your work pieces together. I haven't got any dedicated welding clamps. I didn't like what I saw at Harbor Freight. I saw some recommendations for some that were on Amazon, so I may just order those. But I've just got a few little clampy things around that I'll just use for now while I'm just doing some small practice stuff. Welding chipping hammer. With the flux welding, the weld ends up with a layer of slag. I can't profess to truly understand all of that, what that is, why that's there, but you have to sort of chip it away. This speed square was one of the first things I bought because I saw everyone, in all the welding videos, everyone uses one of these, and it's true. It's been super, super useful. So I watched a ton of videos before diving into all of this, and I highly recommend you do the same. There are experienced welders out there freely sharing their hard-earned knowledge on YouTube, and you can learn a lot by listening to what they have to tell you. But here are a few particularly useful bits of information that I picked up from watching videos on YouTube. And this is assuming that you know nothing about welding, which is where I was at 2 weeks ago. With this kind of welder, basically the way it works is there's a clamp which attaches to the metal that you're working on, and then the welding gun itself pushes some wire out and is charged with a super high amount of electricity, and so basically this completes a circuit when the welding wire comes in contact or close to contact with the metal, and that heat of that arcing electricity basically melts the wire. More or less something like that. Also, it may seem obvious, but you need to work on a surface that is in no way flammable, either on a concrete floor or a metal table. Make sure all the same you're prepared for fire, got a fire extinguisher nearby. Another thing to be aware of is to, whichever welder you're using, make sure you know what the duty cycle is, because a unit like this can only generate all of that electricity for a certain amount of time, and then it needs to rest and cool down. I think this one is, I don't remember. I'll put it on the screen. One of the points made in many of the videos that I watched as I was researching this talked about comfort, making sure that you are able to be in a comfortable position for working. It will help you to remain more steady as you're making your welds, and just simply not get as fatigued, which can just simply help you stay alert. There's a lot of little details you have to be conscious of when you're doing this, And so you want to be, you want to be on your A game, especially if you're new to it like me.
Alright, so I'm going to swallow my pride and show you my initial attempts at using the welder.
Alright, first ever attempt at a practice weld. Everything's set up according to the instructions. Wow, I did it. It looks terrible, but I did it. Let's try that again.
It's not pretty, but I'm showing you this to underscore that A, it's not easy. You're going to have to really work at it and practice to get good enough to truly fabricate something. And B, so you don't feel bad if your initial efforts aren't perfect because, well, you can see how bad mine were. These welds are very narrow because I was working on the only scrap metal I had, which was pretty thin, and I also probably moved too fast laying these down. So it's clear I'm definitely going to need quite a bit of practice to sort of get the technique down before I'll be fabricating anything that would ever actually go on a vehicle. Found I didn't really have much in the way of scrap metal sitting around the house or the garage. So I'm gonna run out and get some little bits and pieces just at the home improvement store so that I can do some practicing, try some different techniques. This is not my new car, by the way. This is a borrowed ride. And I love having any excuse to come to Jerry's. So I didn't want to spend a whole lot of money on practice material, so I got a 3-foot length of 1/8 inch thick steel and a little tubing that seems to be similar thickness. I can cut it up and just try a bunch of different things. So I was working on the concrete floor last night, but that's not super comfortable. Today I set up this scrap of metal thing that I've had sitting around. A typical welding table, you would want to have plain metal, not painted metal like this, because then what you can do is you can clamp the ground clamp or whatever you call this right to the table, clamp your work to the table, and then you'll have a flow of electricity going through there. I'll just clamp directly to whatever I'm working on. Well, I'm really struggling to keep it going in a straight line, but they're looking a little bit better. I feel like they're starting to really look like welds. It's definitely a little spattery, and so I guess there can be a number of factors with the spatter. It can be the settings, it can be the speed, how far you have the tip from the workpiece. But another thing that I read in a number of comments is that the wire that comes with this welder tends to be on the spattery side. And a number of people reported replacing the wire with higher quality wire and having a lot of the spatter problems go away. But for now, just for practice, I might as well use what they gave me. So I've always felt pretty intimidated by welding. It just seemed like something that was just going to be out of my wheelhouse. But it was really just a question of like trying to put myself to it, and I'm actually having a lot of fun. I mean, I don't know what I'm doing and it's not going perfectly, but it's kind of fun. Well, that is welded on there. It's not beautiful, but it's not terrible, considering this is the first I've ever done this. It looks like I did sort of burn through down here at the end. I pushed it a little too long down here. That seems to be on there pretty dang good. Rather than just keep making random welds, I felt it would be more compelling to practice my welding by making something that serves a practical purpose and force myself to think about what pieces would need to be cut and in what order I would need to weld them together. I got some more
bits and pieces of metal at a local steel supply that actually has an area of scrap where you can pick it up by the pound. It's very reasonable. And I've already started cutting some pieces. All right, I'm gonna show you these ugly welds that I made just so that if you're learning to weld too, you'll feel better because, yeah, I got a long ways to go here. So yeah, it doesn't look great, but it's definitely solid enough for what it needs to do. The welds are getting a little better. There's a few I'm actually pretty happy about, given that it's only my second day of welding. Plenty that still don't look fantastic. All right, I'm running out of daylight, but I'll show you real quick what I came up with here. The idea is that this is a flat pack cooking grill for cooking over a campfire. So this piece, and these slip in there. And then the cooking piece, grill, goes in there like that. Or if you need it closer to the coals. So I put that next to the campfire, shovel some coals up under there. We'll see if it works. But it was a good project to work on because I had to think about a lot of different things. I had to try a bunch of different things. This is something that I've always wanted to have for camping, and I'm sure I could have bought something for a lot less than what I spent just on the steel, let alone all of the hours that I put into it. But the whole idea here was to spend some time learning to weld and making mistakes, and also just thinking about the design process, thinking about the various steps. So it was an interesting puzzle to put together. Well, I hope that's been helpful in some way. If you've wanted to try some DIY metal fabrication, but like me have always been a little intimidated by the process, I would say don't be. Give it a shot. I would also say have realistic expectations. You're not going to be doing perfect, beautiful welds right out of the gate. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some practice. Ultimately, I think it's worth the effort to have the ability to put metal together. At the same time, I would say be aware of the limitations of your equipment and your abilities, and don't weld something that your life is going to depend on until you know for sure that you can do it and you're sure that it's within the specs of your welding gear. Thanks for watching, and I wish you the best on all your own DIY endeavors. Lucy, I am your father. I don't know how anyone can put on a welding mask and not do Darth Vader.